Hello everyone, Books with Banks back today to talk more Shakespeare, sort of. Shakespeare with a twist, a video game twist. For those of you who don't know, I've been reading one comedy and one tragedy every month so far this year. My most recent tragedy was Coriolanus. This play kept making me think about and kept making me eager to re-examine one of the most intriguing video game characters I've ever encountered. It might seem weird, something as serious and highly regarded as Shakespeare compared to video game characters, but bear with me. Video games really deserve a lot of respect. Any fans of gaming are probably like, yeah, of course, duh. But others not as familiar with gaming culture and the types of stories that can be told there, rest assured, games can be a really wonderful place to explore complicated characters and really profound, kind of beautiful themes. So, I feel like the half antagonist, half protagonist of the greater Metal Gear Saga video game series, the character called Big Boss, has a lot in common with the titular character of Shakespeare's Coriolanus. And I would like to explore some of those similarities and to also address some of the obvious differences, or maybe the holes in this parallel that I'm drawing. First, what are both stories about? Coriolanus is a play about a Roman general thrust into politics after becoming a war hero, but his disdain for the common people quickly makes him their enemy and they get him exiled, despite his war hero status. In exile, he comes to his former battlefield rival, Aufidius, and this time he offers to work with Aufidius instead of against him, and the two of them plan to fight against Rome, the nation that, in Coriolanus' eyes, turned its back on him. In the end, his family is the only group capable of stopping him from attacking his home city of Rome, but even still, Coriolanus has become so popular with Aufidius' armies that Aufidius has him assassinated. Now that's a very brief synopsis. If you'd like something more thorough, feel free to check out my Shakespeare double feature episode from a week or two ago. But that's Coriolanus. Metal Gear, or the more popular and highly regarded main games that are called Metal Gear Solid. What's the story there? Well, it's going to take a little bit longer than that brief synopsis I gave of Coriolanus. And anyone who's played these games knows that it's kind of a horrible question to have to deal with answering what's Metal Gear Solid about. It's a lot, it's complicated, but basically, in as short a synopsis as I can give, these games start off about a United States stealth operative fighting in the Middle East and then in Africa in the 90s. This man's name is Solid Snake, or at least his code name is Solid Snake. And Solid Snake is going on these infiltration missions to rescue POWs, but then ultimately he winds up stumbling on the diabolical plans of the terrorists in any of these missions, the plans of the terrorists to use this new advanced walking mech tank thing that has the ability to fire nuclear warheads. Of course, that mech is called Metal Gear. That's where the series gets its name. Military espionage action adventure is kind of the genre. The first several games follow this format and follow this character, Solid Snake. There's often twists where the person talking to you on the radio or one of the people on your radio is actually one of the big bad guys the whole time. There's often twists around how involved the different scientists are in the planning and construction of these Metal Gear nuclear tanks. And the bosses, the individual kind of specialized enemies you face at the end of different levels. These bosses are always crazy, kind of supernatural, weird experiments, basically superhero villains. Now, things get really weird when we get to stuff about information control, the Patriots, Lolly simulations on an international scale, the Philosopher's Legacy, a lot of complicated international government manipulation stuff going on. We don't really need to worry about that part of the story for this comparison. All you need to know is that in the first few games, you think this guy, Big Boss, is just that, your boss at first, telling you what to do to accomplish the mission, but then there's a twist. He's actually the bad guy running the terrorist base. You defeat Big Boss, but he comes back. You defeat him again, but even then, it's not super permanent. And then other bad guys in later chronological entries worship and try to honor the legacy of Big Boss and what Big Boss was trying to do with his terrorist organization known as Outer Heaven. Now, the game director, the famous Hideo Kojima, he did something really fascinating in kind of the structure of his series. After the success of not the first two games in the series, but the first two 3D console games, one of those being Metal Gear Solid and then Metal Gear Solid 2, these both come after those original ones where Solid Snake was going up against Big Boss. But after the success of these 3D console entries for Metal Gear Solid 3, Kojima wanted to go back in time to tell the story of where Big Boss came from. So now the infamous antagonist of the series becomes our playable character, our protagonist, in a mission to Russia in 1964. This is my personal favorite entry in the franchise, paying wonderful homage to kind of the cheesy early James Bond films, but also with loving nods to the fan community around these games. And more than anything, this Metal Gear Solid 3 game, this entry has one of the most powerful and gripping stories, with just enough weird eyebrow-raising moments to keep us guessing, but the whole time we're kind of wondering what on earth could have happened to turn this seemingly loyal US soldier, this young man, Jack, against his country. And the game goes on to explore things like how soldiers are often treated and mistreated as their own unique class of people, to be used by a country's government for good or ill, but then also to be used as pieces on a chessboard in political games of manipulation, and then later discarded. So we have Jack, the loyal yet fairly dispassionate soldier. He doesn't have much of an identity outside of his job. He doesn't have much care for politics or the why of the missions he's going on or that he's assigned to, but he's respected as a skilled soldier. And then you have a character, not to be confused with Big Boss, you have a character called The Boss, who's Jack's mentor. And The Boss, she occupies a unique role in this comparison I'm making to Coriolanus. The Boss is equal parts Volumnia, Coriolanus' mother, or Jack's mother, but also a sort of prophetic vision to Jack of what would become of him if he continued to let the United States control him in the military and in politics. At the end, trying to remain a little bit vague here, but at the end, The Boss is thrust into this weird situation where Jack could turn traitor and lash out against the United States like Coriolanus does. The Boss could probably get Jack to do that if she were to tell him the whole truth, but just like Volumnia, through her actions, The Boss saves the United States from the threat that Jack would pose to the US, or as Volumnia did for the threat that Coriolanus would pose to Rome. So Jack returns home as a war hero, and he accepts the title of Big Boss, similar to when, at the beginning of the play, Caius Marcius returned home and accepted the title of Coriolanus. And both of these things are one of the last things either man experiences as an honorable and committed citizen of their respective countries. But after being awarded the titles, it is revealed to us, the player and reader, how manipulative and dirty either the US government or the Roman governments actually are. And in the case of the Metal Gear Solid series, Big Boss realizes that his former mentor, the US government was super disrespectful and horrible. And the whole mission and point of the game was to use Jack and his mentor in this really emotionally manipulative and devastating kind of stage scenario. And instead of Big Boss himself ridiculously being called a traitor like Coriolanus was, Big Boss actually cast himself into exile after his mentor was called a traitor. Now, this is all oversimplification of extremely complex games, but I think I've outlined the gist of it to adequately set up this comparison between Shakespeare's tragic character and Kojima's. Now, in a few follow-up games, to better bridge the gap between him, Big Boss, as protagonist to terrorist and antagonist, Kojima shows us time and time again how corrupt these global superpowers actually are, and how on one hand Big Boss is acting in a more virtuous way, creating a place for soldiers to be the ultimate authorities on their fate and their place in any society, as opposed to just the weapons for the hoity-toity political of Western society. But of course, the gray area comes in the fact that Big Boss's military without borders and his Outer Heaven and Zanzibar lands, all of these different kind of independent military organizations he's building, they start to get a hold of some pretty scary technology and weapons. Some things like the titular Metal Gears, to the point that these other major international coalitions, all secretly run by a few rich men and then a massive computer program. Again, I'm oversimplifying that part of the story. But these more well-recognized powers have no choice but to treat Big Boss's kind of haven for soldiers as a terrorist organization, especially when scientists and soldiers are being taken prisoner, and when Big Boss gets a hold of nuclear weapons. Yeah, terrorism isn't a hard call to make on this one. And I think, kind of in short, the whole point of this video here is, I think what Kojima's doing with Big Boss is doing kind of a more thorough and deeper exploration of a character like Coriolanus than what Shakespeare did in that play. Now, sure, a big difference here is that Coriolanus pretty clearly thinks very highly of himself, and he actually really respects the richest politicians, and he despises the lower classes. There's no indication in the Metal Gear games that Big Boss thinks of himself as better than the common people, but he definitely thinks of all military personnel as existing as a kind of separate class of people. Not necessarily better or worse, but definitely separate. Now, I think you could argue he feels this shouldn't be the way of things, but his solution isn't to try and fix this problem from within the system. Instead, it's to completely separate and force himself into his own kind of exile. And, of course, we have him teaming up with former rivals, characters such as Revolver Ocelot, much in the same way Coriolanus was quick to seek out the help of his former rival, Ophidius. Now, one final point of comparison I'd like to make here. Coriolanus has a son, and we're going to get into some of the heavier Metal Gear Solid spoilers, so if you don't want this series spoiled, thank you for watching, but please turn away now. Go pick up the Master Collection that just came out, if you'd like that, just released for current consoles. You can meet all of these wonderful characters here, or in that collection, but maybe while you're playing the Metal Gear games, give Coriolanus a read as well, and see how well the two complement each other. But getting into more detailed spoilers for Metal Gear. Solid Snake, the protagonist of the first few computer games, Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2, Solid Snake turns out to be the son of Big Boss. At first he just or son/clone. At first he just thinks the man is his mission commander. Then he finds out Big Boss is actually his enemy and the leader of all the bad guys. And then we find out over the course of the series that Solid Snake is essentially Big Boss's clone son, and he has to defeat his father. In Coriolanus has a son, but of course his son doesn't defeat him directly. Ophidius, his rival turned ally, has him assassinated. That's kind of the death defeat. That's technically what happens right at the end of the play. But I would argue that the assassination isn't so much Coriolanus' defeat as is the moment when his family convinces him to walk away from Rome and to not attack his home city. When his mother and wife point to his son and say things like, "Look what you'll be destroying if you continue on this terrorist destructive path against your former homeland." And so much in the same way the Coriolanus' son is used to prevent him from going after Rome and used to get him to back down and step out of the way, I would argue that the Patriots, master manipulators of the Metal Gear franchise, the simulation runners, the Shadow Organization, that group uses Big Boss's son, Solid Snake, to protect everything they've built from Big Boss's vengeful and exterior kind of violent ambitions. So I think all that said, I rest my case. And the point isn't that I'm trying to say, look, I cracked the code. These two stories and character arcs are so similar. Big Boss must be inspired by the tragic character of Shakespeare's. No, it's not so much about figuring something out. Again, I'm really not sure if Kojima has much, if any, familiarity with the play. I think it would make sense if he did, but at the end of the day, I'm not trying to prove that he has to have used Coriolanus for inspiration. Instead, I want this video to be showing how comparative analysis exercises like this, especially across different mediums, can really enhance and transform our understanding of famous and beloved characters, whether you've read Coriolanus and never played the Metal Gear games, or if you've played every Metal Gear but never read Coriolanus, or even if you're not familiar with either, I highly recommend reading and playing these with the other in mind, as I find it a more rewarding experience than if I only were trying to evaluate each of these characters' actions and their place in their stories on their own merits, in their own kind of closed off universes. And that should pretty much do it. I am curious to know what other characters you all might have found unexpected similarities between, with whatever games you've been playing, books you've been reading, or TV shows and movies you've seen lately. I'd love to hear any and all of that, and also anyone's feelings about this specific comparison. I'd love to hear that down in the comments below. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.